The decision took less than a second. One glance, one flash of color, and the cardinal changed its mind. For 23 mornings, the bird had landed without hesitation. It came from the same stand of trees beyond the fence, crossed the yard in a smooth arc, and settled onto the feeder as if it belonged there. Then, on the 24th morning, something changed. The bird arrived. It stopped, and it refused to come any closer. At first, nobody would have noticed. The cardinal was still there. The feeder was still there. The yard looked exactly the same. But if you watched carefully, you could feel that something was wrong. The bird wasn't feeding. It wasn't singing. It wasn't behaving the way it had every day before. Instead, it perched on a maple branch nearly 30 feet away and watched. That morning, Richard was sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, just as he had done for years. Retirement had given him something many people spend their entire lives chasing: time. Time to notice the first sunlight touching the grass. Time to hear the chickadees before seeing them. Time to recognize individual birds the way some people recognize neighbors. And he knew this cardinal, not because he had named it, not because it was tame, but because routine creates familiarity. Day after day, season after season, small patterns become part of your life. That's why the hesitation felt so strange. Richard checked the feeder, full. He checked the bird bath, clean. The weather was calm, no wind, no storm, no cat hiding beneath the shrubs. Nothing seemed different. Yet the cardinal remained on that branch, studying the yard as if it were seeing it for the first time. The next morning, the same thing happened, and the morning after that. Now Richard was paying attention, really paying attention. Because one of the first lessons nature teaches is that when an animal changes its behavior, there is usually a reason. Then he noticed the only thing that had changed all week: a bright red jacket hanging over the back of his porch chair, a gift from his daughter. He had worn it every morning since she gave it to him. Coincidence? Maybe. But that simple observation opened a much larger question. Because birds do not experience color the way we do, many species can detect visual details that human eyes completely miss. The world outside your window may look ordinary to you while appearing full of signals to the birds living in it. And that raises a fascinating possibility. What if the cardinal wasn't reacting to the feeder at all? What if it wasn't reacting to the yard? What if it was reacting to Richard? If you've ever noticed birds behaving differently around you, keep that thought in mind. Before this story is over, you may start looking at your own backyard very differently. Richard could not stop thinking about that cardinal, not because the bird had vanished, but because it had remained. Every morning it returned to the same branch, perched quietly, watched intently, and then made the same choice: not to land. That simple yet persistent mystery gradually drew Richard into a fascinating world that most people never realize exists, because the truth is that birds are not seeing the same backyard that we do. Imagine stepping into a room where entirely new colors suddenly appeared on every wall, every chair, and every face around you. Colors you had never encountered before. That imagined experience comes surprisingly close to the way many birds perceive the world. While human eyes contain 3 types of color-sensitive cone cells, many birds possess 4, giving them access to portions of the spectrum that remain completely invisible to us. Research supported by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology suggests that numerous bird species experience a world far richer and more intricate than our own, where what appears ordinary to us may be filled with layers of visual information. A berry is more than just a berry, a feather more than just a feather, and even another bird can look remarkably different depending on the hidden colors woven into its plumage. Suddenly, Richard's red jacket no longer seemed quite so ordinary. Yet color alone was not the entire story. The deeper question was why certain colors carry such significance, and among them, one color appears again and again throughout the avian world: red. Look closely, and you will find it adorning some of America's most familiar backyard birds: the Northern Cardinal, the American robin, and the house finch. Though they differ in species and behavior, they are connected by a color that often conveys important information. Scientists who study visual signaling in birds, including researchers at the University of Washington, have discovered that color frequently serves as a sophisticated communication system. To a bird, vivid coloration can reveal clues about health, physical condition, age, and even competitive strength. In other words, color is not merely decoration, it is information. Take the male Northern Cardinal, for example. Its striking red plumage is no accident. The brilliance of that color is linked to pigments known as carotenoids, which birds acquire through their diet. Studies from Princeton examining carotenoid-based coloration have shown that brighter colors can function as honest indicators of physical condition, meaning healthier birds often display more vibrant plumage. Other birds notice these signals and respond to them. The same pattern can be seen in house finches. Researchers have observed that coloration influences social interactions and mate selection. Even the familiar American robin relies on visual cues as part of a broader and more complex communication network. The key point is not that birds are simply attracted to the color red. That is not what the science suggests. Rather, birds often associate red with meaning, competition, territory, status, condition, and valuable information. Seen from that perspective, Richard's mysterious visitor begins to seem very different. Perhaps the cardinal was not seeing a jacket in the way Richard saw a jacket. Perhaps it was seeing a signal in interpreting information, making an assessment based on instincts shaped by countless generations. And if that idea sounds unusual, what comes next is even more intriguing. Because birds may not be responding to colors themselves nearly as much as they are responding to what those colors have taught them to expect. The more Richard read, the more intriguing the mystery became, as the science gradually guided him toward an unexpected realization. Birds do not move through the world wondering, "What color is that?" Instead, they navigate their surroundings by asking a far more meaningful question. What does that mean? At first glance, the distinctions may seem subtle, yet it changes everything. Imagine a shadow gliding across a quiet lawn. If you have spent enough time observing birds, you have likely witnessed the scene yourself. One moment, sparrows peck calmly at the ground. The next, the entire flock freezes. Heads lift toward the sky, some birds dart into cover, while others remain perfectly motionless. The shadow itself is not what frightens them. What matters is the possibility hidden behind it. Across thousands of generations, birds have learned that certain shapes overhead can signal the approach of a hawk, so their response is not directed at the shadow, but at the meaning it may carry. This same principle echoes throughout nature. Direct eye contact can unsettle birds because predators often fix their gaze on a target before attacking. Sudden movements can provoke caution because unpredictability is frequently linked to danger. Even a harmless object placed near a feeder may cause hesitation simply because it is unfamiliar. Birds are constantly making predictions, and their survival depends on it. Once Richard understood this, he began to see the cardinal in a completely different light. Picture the scene through the bird's eyes. It arrives at sunrise and sees the feeder, the familiar porch, and the same yard it has visited countless times before. Then something catches its attention, a vivid splash of color where none existed before. The cardinal does not wonder, "Is that a jacket?" It does not care about the brand or whether Richard has bought new clothes. It asks only one question, "Is that safe?" This is where bird behavior reveals a surprising level of sophistication. Ornithologists often describe the choices birds make as a form of risk assessment. Every landing is a calculation, every approach an evaluation. Before committing to a feeder, a bird gathers information. First comes the question of predators. Is there anything nearby that could pose a threat? A cat beneath a shrub, a hawk perched in a tree, or an unfamiliar shape that was not there yesterday. Next comes the matter of escape routes. If danger appears, where can it fly in the next instant? Then there is territorial conflict. Is another bird already claiming this space, or is a dominant individual nearby? Finally comes what researchers call novelty detection. Simply put, birds notice change. They pay close attention when a familiar environment suddenly becomes unfamiliar. Richard's yard had remained unchanged for weeks, and then something shifted. Perhaps the jacket mattered, perhaps it did not, but the change itself almost certainly did. And this is where the story becomes even more fascinating. Some birds react strongly to anything new they see, while others seem largely indifferent. Certain species are naturally cautious, whereas others display remarkable boldness. A chickadee may investigate a new object within minutes, while a cardinal might take much longer. A crow may circle and observe from several angles before deciding what to do. Even among members of the same species, individual personalities can differ dramatically. That is why there is no universal rule stating that every bird will react the same way to the same color. In fact, many birds may ignore it entirely. This misunderstanding reflects one of the most common misconceptions about animal behavior. We are drawn to simple explanations and often hope for a single cause or a single answer, yet nature rarely operates so neatly. What scientists continue to uncover is that bird behavior emerges from multiple layers of information being processed simultaneously. Color is one layer, movement another, familiarity another, and past experience yet another. A bird is not responding to a single detail. It is responding to an entire pattern. Suddenly, Richard's question became far larger than a red jacket. If birds are constantly evaluating signals, then every morning, in backyards across America, countless tiny decisions are being made that most of us never notice. Decisions about safety, trust, and whether to stay or leave. And once you begin to see the world through that lens, you realize something truly remarkable. The birds visiting your yard may be paying attention to far more than just your feeder. Once Richard arrived at that realization, he decided to try something simpler and far more revealing. Rather than wondering whether the cardinal disliked a particular color, he began asking a deeper question. What else was the bird noticing? For several mornings in a row, he settled into the same chair at the same time. Some days he wore the red jacket, and some days he left it hanging indoors. Sometimes the cardinal landed nearby, while other times it kept its distance. Yet the pattern was far less straightforward than he had imagined, and that uncertainty became one of the most valuable lessons of all. Color, after all, is only one signal among countless others, and it may not even be the most important cue birds rely on when assessing the people around them. Think about how you recognize someone familiar. Rarely is it a single feature that gives them away. It is their voice, their posture, the rhythm of their walk, the time they usually appear, and hundreds of subtle details your mind has quietly gathered over time. Birds, surprisingly, do much the same. They are constantly observing, collecting information, and forming expectations about the world around them. Among the strongest signals they notice is routine. Birds pay close attention to when things happen. A chickadee visiting a feeder each morning quickly learns whether someone typically appears at 7 o'clock or 9. A cardinal becomes familiar with the quiet moments of a backyard. A crow may even recognize the days when trash cans line the curb. To us, these details may seem trivial, but to birds they create a sense of order and predictability in an otherwise uncertain world. Movement is another powerful clue. If you watch a bird carefully as someone crosses a yard, you will often notice that slow, steady motion produces a very different response from sudden, erratic movement. The bird is not making a moral judgment about the person. It is simply assessing risk. Predictable actions are easier to interpret, while unpredictable ones invite caution. Eye contact also plays a role. Many birdwatchers have observed that birds often become more uneasy when they are stared at directly. Researchers suggest this may be linked to the way predators focus intensely on a target. Looking at a bird is not necessarily threatening, but from the bird's perspective, it is another piece of information to consider. Yet beyond color, movement, and eye contact lies something even more influential: consistency. This is where many people misunderstand trust in the animal world. We often think of trust as an emotional connection, but birds do not necessarily trust a person because that person is kind. Instead, they trust patterns. A blue jay may return again and again because nothing unpleasant happens when a particular human is nearby. A chickadee may venture closer because the same routine unfolds day after day. A cardinal may relax because the environment behaves exactly as expected. Even crows, renowned for their intelligence, seem capable of forming long-lasting memories tied to specific people and repeated experiences. The more reliable the pattern, the easier it becomes for a bird to navigate its decisions. This opens a fascinating window for anyone who enjoys watching birds at home. Your backyard can become a living experiment in behavior and perception. Stand in the same spot for several days and observe what changes. Move slowly one week and more briskly the next. Wear different colors, keep notes, and pay attention to how long birds hesitate before approaching. Notice which species appear cautious and which seem naturally curious. You may be surprised to discover that the birds visiting your yard are responding to a complex blend of signals you never realized you were sending. And this brings us back to Richard. The longer he watched, the less convinced he became that the mystery revolved around a jacket alone. The cardinal had been observing something much larger: the porch, the yard, the feeder, the daily rhythm, and perhaps Richard himself. Birds do not place their trust in kindness alone, they place it in consistency. And once a bird begins to recognize a dependable pattern, something remarkable happens. It no longer sees a human as a random figure passing through the landscape. Instead, that person gradually becomes part of the landscape itself. A few weeks later, Richard noticed something he had nearly given up hoping for. The cardinal had returned. It did not happen suddenly or in any dramatic fashion. One morning, the bird settled on a branch a little closer to the feeder, and a few days later, it ventured even nearer. Then, as quietly and naturally as the mystery had first appeared, the cardinal slipped back into its familiar routine. Looking back, Richard realized that the true heart of the story had never been the jacket itself. The jacket had simply given him a reason to pay closer attention, drawing his eyes towards something he had overlooked all along. For weeks, he had assumed he was the observer, the one carefully watching the birds from a distance. Yet the deeper and more fascinating truth was that the birds had been observing him as well. Not in the way people observe one another, with curiosity about personal lives or opinions, but in their own subtle and instinctive way. Birds do not need to understand us as humans understand each other, yet through countless small encounters, they learn something remarkably important. Who is familiar, who behaves predictably, and which places are generally safe. At first glance, this may not seem extraordinary, but for a wild bird, such judgments can mean the difference between danger and security every single day. Of course, no two birds respond exactly the same way. Not every cardinal will hesitate at the sight of a bright color, and not every bird notices the same details. Their behavior is shaped by species, season, territory, personality, past experiences, weather conditions, food availability, and countless other influences that scientists are still striving to understand. Perhaps that very uncertainty is what makes backyard birding so endlessly captivating. No two yards are identical, no two birds are exactly alike, and no single rule can fully explain every interaction. To me, the most intriguing part of this story is not the color of a jacket, but the realization that the birds beyond our windows may be paying far more attention to us than we ever imagined. Each morning, while we sip coffee, water flowers, refill feeders, or simply walk through the yard, tiny decisions are unfolding all around us. Decisions about familiarity, risk, and trust. And sometimes, without even realizing it, we become woven into a bird's understanding of the world. That thought leaves me wondering, have you ever noticed a bird behaving differently after you changed something small in your yard, adjusted your daily routine, or approached a feeder in a new way? Your experience might hold another piece of a quiet mystery that many of us are only beginning to discover.